I interviewed Lou Reed in 2007. Lou had a reputation for being extremely difficult with journalists, extremely difficult with interviews, and that was indeed the case when I met him. He once defined his definition of abject misery as being interviewed by an English journalist. And I have to say that from the get-go, he was extraordinarily difficult. I'd arranged to meet him in his favourite restaurant in New York, in Greenwich Village, and he walked in 15 minutes after the allotted time, and I gestured to him across the room, and he came across and sat down. You could almost feel the force field of sort of hostility that was kind of flowing off him towards me. And he looked at regarded my outstretched hand as if it were a cattle prod. The first thing he said was, "The interview begins when you switch on your tape recorder." But he didn't give me any indication that he wanted me to switch on the tape recorder. And he then started faffing around with his telephone, took a telephone call, started texting, the waiter came over, he engaged the waiter in a very animated conversation. For about 20 minutes, I was sitting there with no indication on his part that I was even at the table, let alone that we were supposed to be doing an interview. And I think, on reflection, I think this is all just part of his psychology, part of his game playing, really. John Cale famously said about Lou Reed, he liked to kind of emit these rays of hostility towards people in order to sort of gain advantage of them, that it was a way of gaining control. And I also think that by this stage in his career, he just had it with interviews. He was just tired of people asking the same old questions about, how did you write Waiting for My Man? Tell me about writing Heroin. Tell me about the Velvet Underground. Tell me about Andy Warhol. But I have to say that once one was able to engage him in subjects that he was interested in, then he was an extraordinarily illuminating, interesting and fascinating interview. We got talking about a very obscure rhythm and blues record from the 1960s, I Found a Love by the Falcons. And I think I made some remark about his guitar playing on one of his songs, reminding me of Robert Ward's guitar playing on the Falcons. And he just sort of lit up at the fact that he was able to talk about the Falcons, who, I didn't know this, but that you know, was a group that he'd obviously loved, or he'd loved that record. The truly interesting thing to me about Reed is that he was an extraordinary literary songwriter. I mean, he was a great rock and roll singer. He was a very underrated rock and roll guitarist, in my mind, a great composer of rock and roll songs. But his main influences were literary as much as they were musical. William Burroughs, Delmore Schwartz, and his great literary hero was Hubert Selby, the author of Last Exit to Brooklyn. And what Selby was writing about was the life of an addict, the life of the sort of the demi-monde, but writing about it in a very powerful, direct, unexpurgated, very honest way. And in fact, Lou Reed talked about what an enormous influence Selby's writing was on him, and he said that he wanted to do in rock and roll what Hubert Selby had done in literature, to write in that completely honest, completely unexpurgated way. So I think it's right to say that he was an enormous influence on people, but it's that candor and honesty in his early songwriting. And in his later songwriting too, it's that candor and honesty, and also it should be said that candor and honesty, you know, in an encounter with an English journalist. That's what was so remarkable about him.